Do you believe happiness is something granted to you by others, a fragile gift bestowed only when you have pleased, performed, or conformed? How often do you find yourself chasing the approval of distant faces or the fleeting applause of a crowd, only to awaken to a hollow echo within? The world whispers that happiness lies in external validation, in the smiles you garner, the possessions you acquire, or the status you achieve. Yet, this pursuit, so common and so relentless, often leads not to joy but to exhaustion and more profound emptiness. You start chasing the shimmering mirage of happiness not because it is truly found in these external things, but because society has conditioned you to believe that your worth is measured by them. But what if this is a profound misunderstanding? What if happiness does not depend on the shifting tides of other people's opinions or on the accumulation of transient rewards? Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." You awaken when you turn inward, when you prioritize yourself, not in arrogance or selfishness, but in the quiet, unshakable assertion that your peace, your values, and your rational mind matter above the clamor of external demands. Happiness begins not in the world, but within your own choices. Not because the world is unimportant, but because your inner world is the soil from which all true contentment springs. The Stoics, those ancient architects of wisdom, understood this with piercing clarity. Seneca wrote of the soul's sovereignty, reminding us that it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. You start to grasp that true wealth, true happiness, is not the applause of others, but the quiet approval of your own reasoned self. The world will demand much of you. It will call you to please, to sacrifice, to bend and twist in the guise of love or duty. Yet, if you do not first prioritize yourself, your integrity, your tranquility, you will find yourself adrift, a ship without anchor in a sea of ceaseless expectation. That kind of happiness is a mirage. It shimmers, entices, and disappears the moment you reach for it. The kind of happiness you seek begins when you say, "Not because others demand it, but because I choose it. I choose to care for myself first." Not because you are indifferent to others, but because you understand that the wellspring from which you give must be replenished from within. This is not selfishness. This is self-respect. This is the foundation upon which all genuine connection and joy are built. When you stop seeking approval, you reclaim your inner peace. When you stop defining yourself by the reflections in others' eyes, you become the master of your own happiness. But why is this so difficult? Why does the society in which we live so often conflate self-prioritization with selfishness? The answer lies in a pervasive misunderstanding of what it means to love oneself. Love is not indulgence, nor is it neglecting the needs of those around you. True love, rooted in Stoic wisdom, is a disciplined act of honoring your own nature, your own reason, your own soul. You start to see that the root of frustration and emptiness lies not in the world's demands, but in your response to them. When you give away your power to external forces, expecting validation, fearing rejection, you become a prisoner to circumstances beyond your control. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Strength begins when you prioritize the governance of your own mind, your own values, your own peace. Happiness doesn't come from bending yourself to fit the shape of others' desires. It comes from standing firm in your own shape, your own essence. It comes from the discipline of turning inward, letting go of the need to be constantly affirmed by the world, and recognizing self-care not as a luxury, but as a necessity. The kind of happiness that lasts is the kind that is forged in the quiet moments of reflection, the deliberate choice to honor your own soul above the cacophony of external demands. You start to understand that the chaos of seeking approval is a fool's errand, an endless race with no finish line. When you place your happiness in the hands of others, you become vulnerable to their whims, their judgments, their unpredictable moods. But when you prioritize yourself, your own reasoned self, you build a fortress of tranquility no storm can breach. Not because you are cold or detached, but because you are wise and discerning. Because you have learned that the quality of your inner life shapes the quality of every moment you live. Happiness begins when you choose to nurture your own spirit before you seek to please the world. When you do this, you do not isolate yourself. On the contrary, you become more present, more grounded, more capable of authentic connection. You start to see that the pursuit of happiness through others' approval is a form of bondage. It is a string attached to a kite, tethering you to the unpredictable winds of external judgment. Freedom comes when you cut that string. When you prioritize yourself, you reclaim the sky. You reclaim the power to soar unimpeded. Do not mistake this for arrogance. The Stoics remind us that the highest form of freedom is found in aligning with nature and reason. You start to see that to prioritize yourself is to live rightly according to your own nature, to cultivate the virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance within your own heart. It is to understand that your first responsibility is to your own rational soul. This is not a call to isolation, but a call to clarity. To see yourself as the steward of your own happiness, not its slave. To understand that your peace is not a prize to be won from the outside world, but a sanctuary you build within. Happiness doesn't come from the approval you seek. It comes from the approval you give yourself. When you let go of external dependencies, you begin the slow, deliberate journey inward. You begin to build a foundation of self-care, which the Stoics identified as essential. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." This is the essence of self-priority, the conscious act of knowing yourself, setting your boundaries, and honoring your own well-being before extending yourself to others. You start to see that without this foundation, all the joys the world offers are like leaves scattered in the wind, temporary and fragile. But with it, happiness becomes an enduring flame, lit not by others' hands, but by your own steady, reasoned choice. So, ask yourself, are you seeking happiness in the hands of others, or within your own sovereign self? Are you ready to prioritize yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity? Because it is only when you place yourself first, with quiet strength and reason, that you begin to know the true nature of happiness. You start to notice how the world incessantly demands your attention, your time, and your affection, often at the expense of your own well-being. Society, with its unyielding narratives, encourages you to place others' needs before your own, to sacrifice self for the sake of appearance or obligation. Yet, is this truly the path to inner peace? Or is it a subtle erosion of the very foundation upon which lasting happiness rests? The kind of happiness that endures cannot flourish in the soil of self-neglect. It wilts under the weight of perpetual giving without replenishment. You must learn, with deliberate care, to set boundaries, not as walls to isolate, but as fences to protect your sacred ground. This is the Stoic art of self-prioritization, the disciplined recognition that some things are within your power, others are not, and your energy is finite. Seneca urged us to associate with those who will make a better man of you. But to do so, you must first be that better man or woman yourself. You start by focusing on what lies within your control, your judgments, your desires, your actions, and by refusing to expend precious resources on what lies beyond. When you prioritize yourself in this way, you forge a path toward greater self-awareness, emotional resilience, and freedom from unhealthy attachments. Not because you intend to turn away from others, but because you understand that a well-tended self is the source from which genuine generosity flows. You cannot pour from an empty cup. That kind of happiness, the kind that is sustainable and authentic, is born from a clear-eyed commitment to your own well-being, not from endless sacrifice or codependence. This is where the Stoic practice of setting boundaries becomes paramount. You start to see boundaries not as barriers, but as declarations of your worth, of your limits, and of your commitment to yourself. They are the lines you draw in the sand to protect your peace and your sanity. They are the quiet, firm no that preserves the sanctity of your inner life. When you prioritize yourself, you allow space for self-reflection and growth. You begin to discern which relationships nourish your soul and which deplete it. You become capable of shedding attachments that no longer serve your flourishing, no longer align with your values. This process is not easy. It requires courage and clarity, a willingness to confront discomfort and uncertainty. Yet, it is within this tension that true growth emerges. The Stoics teach that adversity is the forge in which virtue is tempered. Emotional resilience is cultivated by facing life's challenges with equanimity, not by fleeing or sacrificing the self to avoid pain. You start to understand that vulnerability is not weakness but the gateway to strength, provided it is held within the boundaries of self-respect. Not because you close yourself off, but because you engage with the world from a place of fullness, not depletion. This equilibrium, between openness and protection, between care for others and care for self, is the essence of the Stoic way. It demands discernment, which is the ability to see clearly what is beneficial and what is harmful to your well-being. You start to recognize that prioritizing yourself is not synonymous with selfishness. It is, instead, a disciplined commitment to living in accordance with nature and reason. Epictetus reminds us that no man is free who is not master of himself. Mastery begins with knowing your limits and honoring them. It begins with choosing yourself as the first and foremost responsibility. In this light, self-priority becomes an act of justice toward your own soul. It is the acknowledgement that you deserve care, respect, and the space to thrive. When you cultivate this justice inwardly, it naturally extends outward, enriching your relationships and your contributions to the world. When you stop bending yourself to fit the expectations of others, you start to live authentically. You start to shed the heavy cloak of codependency, which often masquerades as love or duty, but is, in truth, a form of self-neglect. You begin to say yes to your own needs and no to demands that erode your peace. This is not a rejection of connection, but a redefinition of it. Connection rooted in mutual respect, honesty, and virtue. Not because you are indifferent to others' struggles or needs, but because you understand that your own stability is the foundation upon which all genuine empathy and support rest. The Stoics teach that a life lived well is one in which reason governs passion, and self-care is a prerequisite for care of others. You start to see that when you prioritize yourself, you become a beacon of strength and clarity in your relationships. You are less likely to be swayed by emotional turbulence, less likely to sacrifice your values for approval. Instead, you stand firm in your boundaries, inviting others to meet you there, in a space of shared dignity and respect. This balance is delicate and requires ongoing attention. It is a skill honed through reflection, discipline, and courage. The Stoics did not promise ease in this endeavor, but they assured us that it is the path to true freedom and contentment. Happiness emerges not from the approval of others, but from the disciplined choice to honor yourself first. You start to understand that the world will always press upon you, demanding more than you can or should give. The question is not whether those demands exist, but how you respond. Will you allow yourself to be consumed, or will you rise with the quiet strength to say, I choose my peace first? This choice is the gateway to emotional resilience. It frees you from the tyranny of external approval and the chaos of unmet expectations. When you prioritize yourself, you reclaim your power to navigate life's challenges with grace and equanimity. You become the steward of your own happiness, the guardian of your own soul. Not because you wish to isolate yourself, but because you have learned that only from a place of fullness can you truly engage with the world. The Stoics remind us that virtue is its own reward, that living in accordance with reason and nature brings a peace no external circumstance can shake. You start to see that self-prioritization is not a destination but a continuous practice, a lifelong commitment to tending the garden of your inner life. It is the courage to set boundaries, the wisdom to discern what serves you, and the discipline to nurture your own well-being above all. When you embrace this practice, you do not close yourself off from the world. Instead, you open yourself to deeper, more authentic relationships grounded not in need or dependence, but in mutual respect and shared virtue. You become a wellspring of strength, calm, and genuine connection. So, ask yourself, are you willing to set the boundaries that protect your peace? Are you ready to prioritize yourself not out of selfishness, but out of a profound commitment to your own flourishing? Because only then can you begin to live a life marked not by exhaustion or resentment, but by clarity, resilience, and authentic happiness. You start to recognize that the happiness cultivated through self-prioritization is not a fleeting pleasure, nor a capricious whim of the moment. It is something far deeper, rooted in rational self-governance and the disciplined mastery of your own mind. Happiness of this kind is not born from external circumstances or transient impulses. It is forged in the steady practice of mindfulness and intentionality. Marcus Aurelius said, "He who lives in harmony with himself lives in harmony with the universe." This harmony arises not from the absence of difficulty, but from the presence of reason guiding each thought, each action. When you prioritize yourself through the lens of reason, you begin to understand that your emotions and desires are not masters to serve blindly, but signals to be observed, understood, and, when necessary, restrained. Happiness doesn't come from the gratification of every impulse or the surrender to every desire. That kind of happiness is brittle, dependent on circumstances beyond your control, and thus vulnerable to disappointment. True happiness comes from acting intentionally, choosing which desires to entertain and which to set aside in the service of a higher good. You start to see the Stoic ideal taking shape, living in accordance with nature and reason, cultivating virtues that align your inner world with the external realities you cannot control. This alignment brings freedom, a freedom not of license, but of mastery. You are no longer tossed about by the storm of passions or the chaos of external events. Instead, you remain anchored, steady, and clear. The practice of mindfulness and reflection becomes your compass. Through regular introspection, you examine your judgments and emotions, discerning which are grounded in truth and which are distorted by fear, desire, or habit. This vigilance is not a burden. It is the path to equanimity, the calm center from which happiness radiates. You start to understand that controlling desires and emotions is not suppression but transformation. It is the alchemy of turning base impulses into reasoned choices. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." By mastering your inner life, you are not denying hardship but embracing the resilience to meet it without losing yourself. This resilience is the essence of freedom. It frees you from the tyranny of external chaos and the tyranny of internal disorder. You begin to live with intentionality, responding to life's challenges with clarity rather than reaction. This is the kind of happiness that endures because it is rooted in your own reasoned will, not in the shifting sands of circumstance. You start to see that true happiness is not an emotion but a state of being, a state cultivated by consistent, deliberate choices. It is the fruit of living virtuously, where your actions reflect wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. When you prioritize yourself through this lens, your happiness becomes a byproduct of living rightly rather than a goal to be chased. Not because you seek pleasure, but because you seek harmony within yourself. Not because you avoid pain, but because you cultivate the strength to endure it with grace. This is the Stoic path, a path that invites you to be the master of your own mind, the architect of your own peace. You start to understand that happiness is sustained not by avoiding life's challenges, but by engaging with them from a place of inner stability. This stability comes from the disciplined practice of self-governance, choosing your responses, maintaining your composure, and acting in accordance with your highest values. When you prioritize yourself in this way, you do not become isolated or detached. On the contrary, you become more present and more capable of genuine connection. Your interactions with others are no longer driven by need or fear, but by choice and virtue. This presence is a gift, not only to yourself but to all those you encounter. You start to see that the mind, when governed by reason, is a sanctuary. Within it lies a tranquility that no external tumult can breach. Marcus Aurelius advised, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." You begin to cultivate thoughts that align with truth and virtue, banishing those that lead to disturbance and discontent. This cultivation is not a one-time act, but a continuous practice. Each day presents new opportunities to exercise your rational will, to choose virtue over impulse, and to maintain your equanimity amid life's inevitable challenges. This is the essence of self-mastery, the ongoing commitment to live in harmony with your own nature. You start to realize that happiness sustained through self-prioritization is a profound freedom, the freedom to live according to your own reasoned values, regardless of external circumstance. It is a freedom that transcends pleasure and pain, approval and rejection. It is the freedom to be yourself, fully and authentically. Not because the world is easy or kind, but because your inner life is strong and disciplined. Not because you control all that happens to you, but because you control your judgments and actions in response. This is the power of Stoic wisdom, to find joy not in what happens, but in how you meet it. You start to see that the practice of mindfulness and reflection is the anchor of this power. By regularly turning inward, you maintain the clarity needed to navigate life's complexities with grace. You avoid being swept away by fleeting passions or external chaos, choosing instead to act with purpose and virtue. This practice deepens your self-awareness, revealing the subtle ways in which desires and emotions can cloud your judgment. You begin to recognize patterns, triggers, and false beliefs that have previously led you astray. With this awareness comes the power to change, to align your actions more closely with your reasoned self. You start to understand that happiness is not a destination but a way of living, an ongoing engagement with life that embraces both joy and challenge with equal equanimity. This way of living is sustained by rational self-governance, the conscious choice to prioritize your inner life above the noise of the world. When you live in this way, you embody the Stoic ideal, a person who is free, grounded, and at peace. You become a beacon of calm amid chaos, a steady presence in a turbulent world. Your happiness is no longer a fragile thing dependent on circumstance, but a resilient flame kindled by your own reason and virtue. You start to see that this is the kind of happiness worth pursuing, the kind that endures because it is rooted in the mastery of self. It is the happiness that comes not from seeking to control the world, but from mastering your own mind and actions. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Not because it promises comfort, but because it offers freedom. This is the path you are invited to walk, a path of mindfulness, reflection, and rational self-governance that sustains true happiness through all seasons of life. You start to realize that prioritizing yourself inevitably reshapes your relationships, casting a new light on how you engage with others. It is not a turning away, but a turning inward that enables you to step into connection with greater authenticity and strength. Yet, this transformation demands discernment, the wisdom to know when to open your heart and when to protect it, to offer care without losing yourself in the process. The delicate balance between caring for others and upholding your own well-being is a dance that requires both courage and clarity. You begin to see that relationships grounded solely in approval or emotional dependence are fragile, often leaving you vulnerable and depleted. The kind of relationships that endure and nourish are those built on mutual respect, honesty, and shared purpose. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. But before you can do this, you must be that person yourself, rooted in your own values and boundaries, capable of offering genuine presence without sacrificing your peace." You start to understand that true connection arises not from neediness, but from the strength of self-possession. When you prioritize yourself, you cultivate the capacity to engage with others authentically. This authenticity is a gift, both to yourself and to those you encounter. You are no longer a chameleon, shifting to fit the expectations of others, but a person who stands firm in their own truth. This firmness does not close you off, but invites others to meet you in a space of honesty and virtue. You start to see that discernment is essential in navigating relationships. Not all connections serve your growth or align with your values. Some may demand too much, ask for sacrifices that erode your well-being, or foster dependence rather than mutual support. The courage to say no when necessary is as important as the willingness to say yes when it honors your soul. This discernment is not cold calculation, but a compassionate act of self-care. It is the wisdom to recognize when a relationship nourishes your spirit and when it drains it. It is the strength to release ties that no longer serve your flourishing, even when such release brings discomfort or loss. You start to understand that upholding your self-worth within relationships is an act of justice, not only to yourself, but to others. When you engage from a place of integrity, You model the virtues of honesty and respect. You invite others to do the same, creating the conditions for authentic connection rather than superficial approval. The Stoics remind us that relationships should be grounded in virtue rather than mere sentiment. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." This imperative extends to how you relate to others. Embody the qualities you seek, and you attract those who share them. You start to see that the balance between openness and protection is a dynamic process. It requires ongoing reflection and adjustment. At times, you may need to withdraw to preserve your peace. At other times, you may choose to extend yourself generously. This balance is maintained not by rigid rules, but by the steady guidance of your own reason and values. Prioritizing yourself in relationships does not mean neglecting empathy or compassion. On the contrary, it deepens your capacity for genuine care because it emerges from a place of fullness rather than need. You become present not to fill a void, but to share your abundance. You start to recognize how codependency can masquerade as love, an entanglement where boundaries blur and self-neglect becomes the currency of connection. The Stoic approach calls for clarity, love that honors both self and other, that respects the autonomy and dignity of each person involved. In this light, relationships become arenas for practicing virtue, patience, courage, temperance, and justice. You engage with others not to secure your happiness, but to contribute to a shared life of meaning and growth. This perspective transforms how you relate, freeing you from the anxiety of approval and the fear of rejection. You start to see that prioritizing yourself equips you to navigate conflict and difficulty with greater equanimity. When your sense of worth is grounded internally, you are less likely to be swayed by criticism or praise. You respond from a place of reasoned calm, maintaining your boundaries while remaining open to dialogue and understanding. This strength fosters healthier, more resilient relationships. You become a partner, friend, or family member who offers support without losing sight of your own needs. You invite reciprocity rather than one-sided sacrifice, creating a foundation for lasting connection. You start to understand that the path of self-prioritization within relationships is not easy. It challenges ingrained patterns of people-pleasing, fear of abandonment, and the desire for constant approval. Yet, it is the path to freedom, a freedom that allows you to love fully without losing yourself. Not because you withdraw or isolate, but because you engage from a place of strength and clarity. Not because you reject others, but because you honor your own nature and values as fiercely as you honor theirs. This is the essence of authentic relationship, a meeting of whole selves, each responsible for their own happiness and growth. You start to see that this approach aligns with the Stoic ideal of living virtuously within the social world. Epictetus taught that we are social beings, called to fulfill our roles with justice and integrity. Prioritizing yourself does not negate this call. It empowers you to answer it more fully. When you embrace self-priority in relationships, you cultivate the courage to be honest, the wisdom to choose well, and the strength to uphold your boundaries. You create space for connections that uplift rather than diminish, that celebrate rather than consume. You start to understand that the quality of your relationships reflects the quality of your inner life. When you nurture yourself with respect and care, you radiate that energy outward, attracting and sustaining bonds rooted in virtue and love. This is not a promise of perfection, but an invitation to practice, to engage with others from a place of clarity, presence, and self-respect. It is a journey of continual learning, growth, and refinement. So, consider, how do your relationships reflect your commitment to yourself? Are you willing to engage with others authentically, setting boundaries that protect your well-being? Are you prepared to embrace the discernment necessary for relationships grounded in mutual respect and shared virtue? Because it is through this delicate balance between self-prioritization and genuine connection that you discover not only the depth of your own strength, but the true essence of meaningful relationships. You start to see that the fulfillment found in prioritizing yourself is not a fleeting sensation, but a profound state of contentment, grounded in the acceptance of what lies within your control and what does not. This paradox, so central to Stoic wisdom, reveals that happiness grows not from accumulating external goods or accolades, but from mastering the art of inner peace and self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius said, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." You start to understand that true happiness is born from this acceptance, a serene acknowledgement of the limits of your power coupled with a courageous embrace of your own nature. It is not resignation, but a disciplined choice to find peace within, regardless of the world's vicissitudes. Happiness doesn't come from the illusion of control over external events, but from the clarity and strength with which you govern your own mind and actions. This clarity is the fruit of continuous self-reflection and the unwavering courage to honor your own needs first. The journey to self-mastery is arduous, requiring vigilance against old habits of self-neglect and the ever-present temptation to seek approval outside yourself. You start to see that this journey is a lifelong commitment, a path without a final destination, but rich with meaning and growth. It is a path where discipline and compassion walk hand in hand. Discipline to maintain your boundaries, to choose virtue in the face of distraction, compassion to forgive yourself when you falter, and to persist with renewed resolve. Seneca wisely observed, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future." You begin to cultivate this presence, the ability to savor each moment grounded in your own reasoned choices rather than the shifting moods of circumstance. This presence is the essence of self-priority, the art of being fully with yourself, anchored in your own values and peace. You start to realize that the responsibility of putting yourself first is not a burden, but a liberation. It frees you from the exhausting cycle of seeking external affirmation and the pain of unmet expectations. When you take ownership of your own happiness, you become the author of your life, no longer a passive recipient of fortune's whims. This ownership demands courage, the courage to stand apart from the crowd, to resist the pull of conformity, and to honor your own path even when it is lonely or misunderstood. But it also brings an unparalleled freedom, the freedom to live authentically, according to your own reasoned will. You start to see that true contentment is not a static state, but a dynamic equilibrium, maintained through constant self-examination and adjustment. It is the practice of returning to yourself, again and again, with kindness and firmness. This is the essence of Stoic contentment, a resilient joy that endures through all seasons of life. Not because the external world becomes perfect, but because your inner world becomes sovereign. Not because suffering disappears, but because your capacity to endure and find meaning within it deepens. This is the summit of the Stoic journey, the point where you stand, steady and clear, looking out over the landscape of your life with calm acceptance. You start to understand that happiness, when grounded in self-priority and Stoic acceptance, is a beacon. It radiates outward, touching your relationships, your work, and your engagement with the world. It is a quiet strength that does not demand attention but commands respect through its very presence. This strength is born of reason and virtue, cultivated through the patient practice of knowing yourself, setting boundaries, and choosing your responses. It is a power that transforms not only your own life but the lives of those around you, inviting them into a shared space of integrity and peace. You start to see that the journey to self-mastery and authentic joy is not a solitary one. It is a path walked alongside the wisdom of those who have gone before, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, whose teachings illuminate the way. Their voices remind you that the greatest freedom lies in mastering yourself, and that true happiness begins when you put yourself first. This is not a call to selfishness, but to self-respect. It is an invitation to live deliberately, to choose yourself with the same kindness and firmness you would offer a cherished friend. When you do this, you create a foundation so strong that no external storm can shake your peace. You start to realize that the essence of happiness is presence, the ability to be fully here, fully yourself, in each moment. This presence arises when you stop chasing illusions and start embracing the reality of your own inner life. It is the quiet joy of being at home within yourself. As you stand on this summit, you look back on the journey with gratitude, for the struggles that taught you resilience, for the moments of solitude that deepened your awareness, and for the courage that led you to prioritize yourself against the tide of expectation. You start to see that happiness is not a prize to be won, but a state to be cultivated, a state born from the persistent, loving act of putting yourself first, guided by reason and virtue. It is a lifelong journey, rich with challenge and reward, where the true summit is not outside but within. So, as you gaze forward, ask yourself, are you ready to embrace this path? Are you willing to honor your own needs, to cultivate your own peace, and to walk the road of self-mastery with courage and grace? Because it is here, in this commitment, that authentic happiness begins, and with it, a life lived fully and well.